Imagine the flicker of torchlight, shadows stretching across marble columns, and the sound of a chorus rising in the distance. Welcome, traveler, to the world of ancient Greece, where gods and mortals walked side by side in stories that shaped not only religion but culture, politics, and the very rhythm of daily life. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this from? What time is it now in your world? Because in the world of the Greeks, time was never just hours on a clock. It was sacred, cyclical, bound to festivals, rituals, and the eternal presence of the gods. This is the story of Greek mythology and ancient Greece, gods, culture, and rituals. A journey into a civilization where myths were not just tales, but the very fabric of existence. Stay with me, for by the end of this voyage, you'll not only know the gods of Olympus, but you'll understand how their presence touched every feast, every prayer, every moment of life in the ancient world. Let us begin with the most important truth of the Greeks. Their gods were everywhere. Unlike the distant, untouchable deities of some faiths, the Greek gods were present in every stone, every breeze, every ocean wave. To them, thunder was Zeus speaking. The harvest was Demeter's gift. The sea's anger was Poseidon's wrath. Life was not secular and religious. It was all divine. The mythology we read today as story was, to them, sacred explanation. Religion in ancient Greece was not about salvation or eternal reward. Instead, it was about harmony, balance, and respect. The Greeks lived with the gods, not for them. Worship was woven into every action. Each home had a small altar to Hestia, goddess of the hearth, where the first and last offering of every meal was given. In the city, grand temples rose to honor Athena, Apollo, or Artemis. Sacrifice was not superstition, it was conversation, a way to ask for favor and protection. Consider the daily life of a citizen in Athens. He wakes at dawn, the light of Helios spreading across the Acropolis. Before eating, he sprinkles a few drops of wine onto the ground as a libation to the gods. At the city's heart, the Parthenon looms, not as a museum piece, but as the living house of Athena. On festival days, he will march in procession, carrying offerings, joining hymns, watching sacred dramas unfold in the theater below the citadel. The role of myth in this was central. The myths of Zeus, Hera, Apollo, Aphrodite, and the rest were not bedtime tales. They were explanations of the world, mirrors of human nature, and warnings about hubris, the arrogance of overstepping mortal bounds. When farmers prayed to Demeter, they remembered her grief when Persephone was taken to the underworld, explaining why the earth lay barren in winter. When sailors poured wine into the sea, they thought of Poseidon's temper, knowing that to neglect him meant risking storms. Greek religion had no single holy book, no unified doctrine. Instead, it thrived in song, ritual, and tradition. Priests and priestesses did not preach morality. They maintained sacred order. Their task was to perform the right sacrifices, to keep the gods honored, to protect the purity of rituals. Festivals bound the community together, transforming entire cities into sanctuaries of joy, drama, and reverence. Among these festivals, the Parthenon in Athens stood supreme. Every 4 years, Athenians celebrated their patron goddess Athena with music, athletic games, and grand processions. At its climax, a giant woven robe, the peplos, was presented to Athena's ancient wooden statue. The robe was embroidered with scenes of her victories, reminding citizens that the goddess stood as protector of their city. This was not just religion, it was civic pride, identity, and unity. The Olympic Games themselves began as a religious festival in honor of Zeus. Athletes competed not for personal glory alone, but to bring honor to their city and to Zeus himself. Victors crowned with olive wreaths were seen as blessed by the king of gods. To cheat, to dishonor the games, was to dishonor Zeus. And so, myth became action, story, became law. Ritual sacrifice lay at the heart of Greek worship. Sheep, goats, or bulls were brought to the altar, their lives offered in exchange for favor. But sacrifice was not destruction, it was transformation. The gods received the bones and smoke, while the people shared in the roasted meat, binding divine and mortal in one communal act. Even the poorest could offer cakes, fruits, or incense, for what mattered was devotion, not wealth. Behind these public rituals, there were also mysteries. The Eleusinian Mysteries, held in honor of Demeter and Persephone, remain among the most fascinating religious practices of the ancient world. For centuries, initiates were sworn to secrecy, their experiences hidden from history's gaze. Yet we know they celebrated rebirth, the cycle of life and death, and the hope of renewal beyond the grave. Ordinary Greeks traveled miles to be initiated, believing that through Demeter's mysteries, life itself gained deeper meaning. The gods themselves reflected human society. Zeus was a ruler, Hera a jealous queen, Aphrodite the embodiment of desire, Ares the fury of war, Athena the wisdom of strategy. These divine figures allowed the Greeks to wrestle with their own emotions, ambitions, and flaws. Mythology was a mirror, teaching lessons about balance, excess, and the consequences of pride. But the gods were not all-powerful. They, too, were bound by fate and ancient force even Zeus could not escape. This belief in fate made rituals all the more urgent, for while destiny might be fixed, how one faced it depended on reverence and piety. The Greeks believed that the gods favored those who honored them with devotion, humility, and sacrifice. In the polis, or city-state, religion was both personal and political. Each polis had its patron deity. Athens was Athena's city. Corinth honored Poseidon. Sparta revered Artemis Orthia. Wars could be launched with divine blessing, and victories celebrated with temples and dedications. When the Persians were defeated at Marathon, the Athenians credited their triumph to the favor of the gods, raising monuments in thanks. Yet Greek religion was not rigid. Local traditions blended with pan-Hellenic myths. In one town, a hero might be worshipped as a god, while elsewhere he remained only a figure of legend. The Greeks embraced this diversity, weaving a tapestry of belief that was at once shared and deeply local. Imagine standing in Delphi, the sanctuary of Apollo. Pilgrims from across Greece arrive, climbing the sacred path lined with treasuries built by proud city-states. At the temple's heart sits the Pythia, Apollo's oracle, inhaling fumes from a chasm, her voice speaking riddles that kings and generals interpret as divine command. Here myth and power converge. A ruler might base his entire campaign on the words of Apollo's priestess. In this way, mythology shaped not only private devotion, but the very course of Greek history. The theater, too, was a temple of myth. Tragedies and comedies were not mere entertainment. They were offerings to Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. Through plays, citizens confronted the stories of Oedipus, Medea, or Agamemnon, learning the dangers of pride, vengeance, or neglect of the gods. Theater was collective reflection, a spiritual mirror held up to the soul of the polis. As evening falls in our imagined Athens, the smoke of sacrifices drifts through the air, mingling with the sound of flutes. Families gather at hearths, fires crackling in Hestia's honor. The myths of the gods are told once again, not as fiction but as truth, a living thread that ties the mortal to the divine. Greek mythology, Greek religion, Greek culture all were one. To live as a Greek was to live in the presence of the gods, to see every stone, every storm, every victory and tragedy as part of their eternal drama. And so, as we continue our journey deeper into rituals, festivals, and the culture of the Greeks, remember this. Mythology was not an escape from reality. It was reality itself, the lens through which they saw their world. Night has settled over the Aegean, but the world of the gods does not rest. In every city-state, In every home, rituals continue, for the Greeks lived with an unbroken awareness of the divine. To them, the veil between mortal and immortal was thin, and every act of reverence maintained the fragile harmony between both realms. Let us now look deeper into the great festivals, the pulse of Greek religious life. Festivals were not just holidays. They were sacred events where the whole community gathered, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest aristocrat. Through them, the myths came alive. Among the most famous was the Dionysia of Athens, a festival dedicated to Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, and transformation. Imagine the city swelling with visitors, streets alive with music, wine flowing freely, and the theater preparing to unveil the latest tragedies and comedies. For several days, Athenians suspended daily routines, focusing instead on performance, ritual, and ecstasy. To worship Dionysus was to embrace the boundaries of reason and passion, to honor the dual nature of humanity, the rational and the wild. The performance of tragedies was not casual entertainment. These play stories of Orestes avenging his father, of Medea's vengeance, of Prometheus bound in eternal torment were offerings to the god. The audience, thousands strong, shared a collective experience that was as spiritual as it was dramatic. Through catharsis, through pity and fear, they were purified, learning lessons the myths demanded of them. Another sacred celebration was the Thesmophoria, a women-only festival held in honor of Demeter and Persephone. In this secretive ritual, women left their homes and gathered for several days to perform rites ensuring fertility of the earth and their families. They fasted, made offerings, and shared in sacred stories of Demeter's grief and Persephone's return. Here, myth became an agricultural rhythm, binding human fertility to the fertility of the fields. And then there were the mysteries, rituals shrouded in secrecy, their details hidden even from historians. The Eleusinian Mysteries were the most renowned. Pilgrims walked from Athens to Eleusis, carrying sacred objects and preparing for initiation. Within the Telesterion, initiates experienced revelations so profound that even centuries later, Roman emperors sought initiation. Though the exact rites remain unknown, the essence of the mysteries was hope for renewal, for a blessed afterlife, for communion with the divine. Where Greek religion often focused on present harmony, the mysteries offer glimpses of eternal truth. To the Greeks, heroes too were objects of ritual. Figures like Heracles, Perseus, or Theseus were not only legendary in myth, but honored with sacrifices and shrines. Their tombs became centers of worship, their deeds eternal examples of courage and divine favor. Even ordinary mortals who achieved great acts could be venerated as heroes after death. In this way, the boundary between myth and history blurred, weaving gods, heroes, and mortals into one sacred fabric. The household played its part as well. Each family kept a shrine to Hestia, goddess of the hearth, where fires burned continually as a sign of protection. Meals began and ended with offerings. Travelers poured libations to Hermes before journeys, and children learned early that to dishonor the gods was to invite misfortune. Religion was not confined to temples. It lived in kitchens, doorways, courtyards, and gardens. Yet it was in the grand temples that the awe of Greek religion shone most brightly. Rising above cities, temples were not places for congregational worship as in modern churches, but houses for the gods themselves. The great statue of Athena Parthenos in the Parthenon, shimmering in gold and ivory, was not mere art, it was the goddess's presence. Offerings filled the temple treasury, and sacrifices on the altar outside affirmed her dominion. The temple was the god's dwelling and the city's heart. Delphi, too, embodied this presence. Pilgrims seeking Apollo's guidance offered gifts before approaching the oracle. Kings and generals traveled great distances. Their futures depended on the cryptic words of the Pythia. One ruler might hear that a great empire would fall in battle, not knowing until too late that it was his own. The oracle, bound all of Greece in shared reverence, its riddles shaping wars, alliances, and destinies. Religious life was also marked by the sacred calendar. Every month held festivals, sacrifices, or rituals. Time was measured not simply in days, but in sacred rhythms. Planting and harvest, solstice and equinox, battle and peace, all were tied to divine order. To neglect a festival was to risk the gods' displeasure, for harmony was built on continual recognition of their power. And the gods themselves were not only protectors but punishers. Myths are filled with warnings of mortals who forgot their place. Niobe, who boasted that she was greater than Leto, saw her children slain by Apollo and Artemis. Arachne, who challenged Athena in weaving, was transformed into a spider. These stories reinforced the lesson. Honor the gods, respect their place, and never let pride lead to hubris. The Greeks saw hubris as the greatest sin, for it disrupted cosmic balance and drew down divine retribution. At the same time, mythology offered models of virtue. Odysseus embodied cunning, Heracles strength, Persephone resilience, Athena wisdom. Through ritual and story, Greeks learned not only to fear the gods, but to emulate the best qualities of heroes and deities alike. In daily practice, sacrifice and prayer were acts of diplomacy with the divine. Just as cities negotiated treaties, mortals negotiated with gods. Offerings were gifts meant to secure favor. To pray without sacrifice was considered arrogant. To sacrifice without sincerity was empty. True devotion lay in balance, in giving the gods their due. Religion also reinforced social bonds. Festivals united citizens, strengthened civic identity, and gave women roles of sacred importance, often denied in politics. The priestess of Athena Polias in Athens was one of the most influential women in the city, her presence commanding respect equal to statesmen. Through religion, the Greeks carved out spaces of inclusion, where divine service elevated moral status. Art and architecture flourished in the shadow of these beliefs. Vase paintings depicted myths of gods and heroes, teaching stories to new generations. Temples embodied cosmic order, their columns rising like a hymn in stone. Sculptors captured the divine in human form, their statues embodying the Greek belief that gods resembled mortals, only perfected. Religion was not separate from beauty, it was its highest expression. Music, too, was sacred. Hymns honored the gods, flutes accompanied sacrifices, and choruses echoed in theaters. To sing was to worship, to dance was to embody divine joy. Every art was an offering, every creation a reflection of myth. The agricultural cycle itself was a ritual reenactment of myth. The sowing of seeds echoed Persephone's descent into the underworld. The spring's rebirth mirrored her return. Farmers lived the myth of Demeter each year, their survival tied to her grief and her joy. In this way, myth was not distant but immediate, living in the soil and the harvest. The Greeks also believed in omens and signs. Birds in flight, dreams at night, the entrails of sacrificed animals, all could reveal the god's will. Divination was not superstition but a tool, guiding decisions from marriage to war. The gods spoke in subtle ways, and wise mortals listened. Death, too, was shaped by myth. The dead were buried with offerings to aid them in the afterlife. Coins were placed in the mouths of the deceased, payment for Charon, the ferryman of the Styx. Families poured libations at tombs, honoring ancestors as part of the eternal cycle. Death was not an end but a passage, one that myths explained and rituals guided. Yet despite their reverence, the Greeks were not without doubt. Philosophers like Xenophanes and Plato questioned the morality of the gods, challenging traditional myths. But even as ideas shifted, rituals endured, for religion was less about belief in doctrine than about shared practice. One could debate the gods' nature, but no citizen could ignore their festivals. As we walk deeper into the streets of an ancient polis, the echoes of rituals surround us. Children recite hymns, women weave offerings, priests prepare sacrifices, elders tell stories of Zeus's thunderbolt and Aphrodite's beauty. Life is inseparable from myth, for to be Greek is to live within a world where the gods breathe in every wind and blaze in every star. And so, Greek mythology was not merely a collection of tales. It was the heartbeat of a civilization, pulsing through religion, culture, and daily life. Dawn returns over the hills of Greece, and with it, the cycle of devotion begins anew. The people wake not simply to labor, but to live within the ever-present shadow of the gods. For them, mythology is not past or distant. It is here, alive, woven into every ritual of the day. Let us journey now into the cultural echoes of this mythology, to see how it shaped not only religion but art, politics, philosophy, and the very soul of the Greek world. Consider Greek architecture, where temples crowned every city like jewels upon stone. The Parthenon in Athens, with its flawless proportions and sculpted friezes, was more than a building. It was Athena's house, her eternal gaze over the city that bore her name. Every detail was symbolic. The metapiece told stories of gods battling giants, of Greeks triumphing over barbarians, reminding all who entered that their culture was blessed by divine favor. Across Greece, from the Temple of Apollo at Delphi to the colossal Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, architecture embodied the marriage of myth and civic identity. Sculpture, too, served as a bridge between mortals and immortals. The Greeks believed that the gods took human form stronger, more beautiful, more perfect. Artists sought to capture this perfection, chiseling marble into living bodies that seemed to breathe. A statue of Zeus might tower in Olympia, its gold and ivory gleaming in torchlight, inspiring awe not just for the sculptor's skill, but for the divine presence it represented. These works were not decoration. They were acts of devotion, frozen hymns in stone. Mythology also infused literature, guiding poets and philosophers alike. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were not merely epics, but sacred texts of cultural memory. They told of gods meddling in wars, of heroes wrestling with fate, of mortals navigating divine wrath. Hesiod's Theogony offered a genealogy of the gods, while his works and days tied myth to agricultural life, teaching through stories of Prometheus and Pandora. These works were recited, remembered, and revered, forming the intellectual foundation of Greek civilization. Even philosophy, which often sought reason over myth, could not escape its influence. Plato wrote of the soul's journey, using myths of reincarnation. Aristotle spoke of prime movers that echoed divine order. The myths offered symbols and parables through which abstract truths could be explained. Even as philosophers questioned the literal existence of Zeus or Hera, they used myth to explore morality, justice, and the nature of existence. In politics, myth justified power. Kings and aristocrats often traced their lineage to divine ancestors, claiming descent from Heracles, Apollo, or other gods. City-states adopted myths to assert superiority, linking themselves to divine favor. When Athens promoted its connection to Athena, it was not only religion but propaganda, binding citizens in shared pride and identity. Warfare, too, was steeped in ritual. Before battle, sacrifices were made to Zeus, Athena, or Ares. Omens were read, prayers recited, libations poured. Victory was credited to divine aid, defeat to divine displeasure. After triumph, temples were built, spoils dedicated, trophies raised to honor the gods who granted success. Even the greatest generals, men like Alexander the Great, sought legitimacy through divine connection, claiming descent from Zeus or seeking oracles to validate their conquests. The reach of mythology extended even into love and family. Weddings were accompanied by hymns to Hera, protector of marriage. Aphrodite was invoked to bless unions, Eros to stir passion. Myths of love and betrayal served as cautionary tales, guiding human relationships. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice warned of the fragility of trust, while that of Pygmalion celebrated love's transformative power. Every human bond was seen through the lens of myth. Rituals surrounding death and the afterlife reflected the same mythology. Funerals were accompanied by laments that echoed the cries of Demeter for Persephone. Offerings ensured safe passage into Hades, while tombs bore images of Charon's boat, Persephone's return, or Heracles' ascent to Olympus. The myth softened the fear of death, framing it not as an end but as entry into another realm where gods and heroes awaited. And beyond life and death, myth shaped the Greek understanding of the cosmos. The stars themselves were God's stories written across the sky. Orion the hunter, Perseus the hero, Andromeda the maiden all became constellations. Every night, the heavens reminded the Greeks of their myths, a celestial tapestry reinforcing belief. Yet, what made Greek mythology truly powerful was its adaptability. As Greece expanded, as it encountered Egypt, Persia, and beyond, its myths absorbed new influences. Far from rigid, Greek religion thrived in evolution, reflecting the dynamic nature of the culture itself. But for all its grandeur, its temples, and its festivals, the heart of Greek mythology lay in its humanity. The gods were not perfect beings beyond comprehension. They were flawed, passionate, jealous, loving, and vengeful. They mirrored human nature in divine form. In worshipping them, Greeks did not seek escape from humanity, but reflection upon it. This is why mythology endured. It was not distant dogma, but intimate truth. It explained storms and harvests, births and deaths, victories and defeats. It offered warnings against pride, encouragement in hardship, and hope in mystery. It bound communities, shaped art, and inspired courage. And those centuries have passed, though temples now lie in ruin, though philosophers and historians have debated their truth, the myths remain alive, echoing in every retelling. Now, let us return to the present moment, standing in the ruins of Greece. The Parthenon, though broken, still rises with dignity. The stones of Delphi whisper of Apollo's oracle. The fields of Eleusis remember the secret processions of the mysteries. And in the night sky, the constellations burn as eternal reminders of myths once spoken by firelight. As you listen, wherever you are, whatever time it is in your world, remember that mythology was never just about the past. It was about how humans understood themselves, their fears, their hopes, and their place in the cosmos. For the Greeks, to tell a myth was to tell the truth, not factual truth, but spiritual truth, the kind that lingers long after temples fall and statues crumble. So we close this journey into Greek mythology and ancient Greece. Gods, culture, and rituals. A world where every meal was a prayer, every festival a living story, every temple a house of the divine. A world where the line between mortal and immortal blurred, and where the greatest sin was to forget the gods who walked beside them. And now, traveler, before you leave, one final ritual remains. If you have found value in this journey, honor it as the Greeks would share it with others. Leave your offering of a like, speak your thoughts in the form of a comment, and join this community by subscribing so that the stories of the past may continue to live in the present. For just as myths endured through retelling, so too does this channel thrive when you carry its stories forward. Until our next voyage through history, may the gods of Olympus guide your path. May the muses inspire your days, and may you never lose sight of the myths that still echo through time.